A millionaire forced his son to marry a humble farmer to punish him. However, he was paralyzed by what his son did next. In the luxurious mansion of the Andersons, the family patriarch, Richard Anderson, looked out the window of his office with concern. His son, Jack, had just arrived from another of his wild parties, stumbling and laughing loudly as he got out of his latest model sports car. Richard sighed deeply, knowing that the time had come to take drastic measures. Jack Anderson, 28, was the heir to a business empire valued at millions of dollars. Handsome, charismatic, and naturally charming, he had grown up surrounded by luxury and privilege. However, his life had become an endless succession of parties, scandals, and extravagances that threatened not only his future, but also that of the family business. Meanwhile, miles away, on a modest farm in rural Kansas, Sarah Thompson woke up with the first rays of the sun. At 25, she carried on her shoulders the responsibility of keeping afloat the small property she had inherited from her father and caring for her sick mother, Mrs. Emily Thompson. Sarah was a beautiful woman with sun-tanned skin and honey-colored eyes that reflected determination and kindness. Dressed in worn jeans and a plaid shirt, she headed to the barn to begin her daily chores. While milking the cows, she couldn't help but think about the growing debts and the expensive treatment her mother needed. That same morning, Richard Anderson made a decision that would change the course of both lives. After discreetly investigating, he had discovered Sarah and her mother's situation. In a plan he considered beneficial for everyone, he decided to arrange a marriage between his son and the young farmer. "Jack, I need to talk to you," Richard said firmly. When his son finally woke up at noon, Jack entered his father's office with a carefree smile, but it faded when he saw the serious expression on the patriarch's face. "What's up, Dad? Are you going to lecture me again?" "This is more serious, Jack. I've made a decision, and I expect you to accept it without protest." The young heir felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that tone of voice, and he knew it didn't bode well. "You're going to get married," Richard stated. "What? Are you joking?" Jack let out a nervous laugh. "It's not a joke. I've already arranged everything. You'll marry Sarah Thompson, a young farmer from Kansas. The wedding will take place in a month." Jack was left speechless, unable to process what he had just heard. Married to a farmer? It must be a nightmare. "But Dad, you can't do this to me. I don't know her, I don't love her. How do you expect me to marry a complete stranger?" Richard stood up from his chair and looked at his son fixedly. "It's time for you to take on responsibilities, Jack. This marriage will teach you the value of hard work and humility. Besides, you'll be helping a family in need. Sarah's mother is sick and needs expensive treatments." "And why do I have to be the one to sacrifice?" Jack protested. "Because you're my son and heir. It's time for you to grow up and become the man I know you can be." Meanwhile, on the farm, Sarah received an unexpected call. With trembling hands, she listened to Richard Anderson's proposal. At first, she thought it was a cruel joke, but as the businessman explained the details, she realized the seriousness of the matter. "Mr. Anderson, I appreciate your offer, but marriage to your son? I don't even know him," Sarah responded, still in disbelief. "I understand your confusion, Sarah, but think about your mother, about the treatment she needs. This marriage will ensure her well-being and yours." Sarah looked towards the room where her mother was resting. Mrs. Thompson was getting worse day by day, and the doctors had been clear. Without proper treatment, her days were numbered. With her heart torn between duty and her own desires, Sarah made a decision that would change her life forever. "I accept, Mr. Anderson," she said with a trembling voice. "I'll marry your son." The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and preparations. Jack refused to cooperate, while Sarah tried to maintain her composure in the face of the avalanche of changes in her life. News of the engagement spread like wildfire in both worlds: the high society of New York and the small rural community where Sarah lived. The wedding day arrived sooner than either of them would have liked. In an intimate ceremony at the Anderson mansion, Jack and Sarah were united in marriage. He, dressed in an elegant black suit, maintained a barely disguised expression of annoyance. She, in a simple white dress, tried to contain the tears that threatened to escape from her eyes. As the judge declared them husband and wife, the guests murmured. Jack's friends couldn't believe that the eternal playboy had gotten married, much less to a simple farmer. For their part, the few relatives of Sarah who had been invited felt out of place amid so much luxury. That night, in the room they would share as newlyweds, the atmosphere was tense and awkward. Jack and Sarah looked at each other like strangers, aware that their lives had changed irrevocably. "Listen," Jack said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "I know neither of us wanted this, but since we're here, I propose we make a deal." Sarah looked at him expectantly. "To the world, we'll be a married couple, but in private, each of us will live our life as we want. I'll continue with my friends and my parties, and you, well, do whatever farmers do." Jack's words hurt Sarah more than she expected. Despite not knowing him, she had harbored a small hope that they could get along. "All right," she responded firmly. "But I have one condition. You'll respect my mother and make sure she receives the best treatment possible." Jack nodded, surprised by the determination in his new wife's voice. "Deal," he said, extending his hand. Sarah shook it, thus sealing an agreement that would mark the beginning of their peculiar marriage. As they lay on opposite sides of the huge bed, both reflected on the turn their lives had taken. Jack wondered how long he would have to endure this farce before his father was satisfied. Sarah, for her part, thought about her mother and the farm, wondering if she had made the right decision. What neither of them knew was that this marriage of convenience would be just the beginning of a story that would take them down unsuspected paths, challenging their prejudices and changing their hearts in ways they never could have imagined. The first months of marriage between Jack and Sarah were an emotional roller coaster full of challenges. The couple moved into a luxurious apartment in the heart of New York City, courtesy of Richard Anderson. For Sarah, accustomed to the simple life on the farm, the change was overwhelming. Every morning, Sarah woke up at dawn out of habit, only to find herself alone in the enormous king-size bed. Jack rarely arrived before dawn, and when he did, he reeked of alcohol and expensive perfume. Despite their agreement, Sarah couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment every time this happened. One morning, as Sarah was preparing breakfast in the ultra-modern kitchen she barely knew how to use, Jack stumbled in, his shirt unbuttoned and his hair disheveled. "Good morning, my dear husband," Sarah said in a tone that was part sarcastic, part resigned. Jack grunted in response and collapsed into a chair at the kitchen island. "What are you doing up so early?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "Some of us have responsibilities, Jack," she replied, placing a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. "Eat something, it'll help with the hangover." Jack looked at the plate in surprise. He was used to waking up alone, with nothing but cold coffee waiting for him. The gesture, though simple, disconcerted him. "Thanks," he mumbled, before starting to eat ravenously. Sarah observed him in silence, noticing for the first time how vulnerable he seemed without his carefree playboy facade. For a moment she wondered what lay behind that mask of indifference. The days passed, and a routine was established. Sarah divided her time between visiting her mother in the hospital, where she received the best treatment thanks to the marriage agreement, and trying to adapt to her new life in the city. Jack, for his part, continued with his life of parties and excesses, as if the marriage had changed nothing. However, cracks in their agreement began to appear when Jack's friends started frequenting the apartment. One night, Sarah returned from visiting her mother to find the place full of elegant and noisy people. "Ah, look who's here!" exclaimed Tom, Jack's best friend, with a mocking smile. "The farmer princess." Laughter erupted in the group, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. Jack, who was in the center of the group with a drink in his hand, seemed uncomfortable for a moment but said nothing. Sarah raised her chin, determined not to be intimidated. "Good evening, everyone. Sorry to interrupt, but some of us have to get up early to work." She headed to her room with firm steps, ignoring the whistles and comments behind her back. Once inside, she allowed herself to release the tears she had been holding back. What had she gotten herself into? The next day, the tension between Jack and Sarah was palpable. During breakfast, she finally exploded. "Couldn't you defend me last night, or at least ask them to leave?" Jack looked at her in surprise. "I thought you didn't care what I did. That was our agreement, remember? One thing is for you to live your life, and another very different thing is for you to allow your friends to disrespect me in my own home," Sarah replied, her eyes bright with indignation. Jack fell silent, not knowing how to respond. For the first time, he saw Sarah not as the obligation his father had imposed on him, but as a strong and dignified woman. "I'm sorry," he finally mumbled. "You're right, I shouldn't have allowed that." Sarah nodded, accepting the apology, but still hurt. "If we're going to make this work, we need to establish some boundaries, Jack." That conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Although still distant, they began to show a mutual respect that didn't exist before. Meanwhile, on the farm, things were not going well. Despite Sarah's efforts to keep it afloat, the property was falling into disrepair. One afternoon, she received a desperate call from Pete, the foreman. "Miss Sarah, the rains have damaged much of the crop. If we don't do something soon, we'll lose everything." Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. The farm was more than just a property. It was her heritage, her home. She couldn't let it be lost. That night, when Jack arrived home, he was surprised to find Sarah crying on the couch. "What's wrong?" he asked, feeling strangely concerned. Between sobs, Sarah told him about the situation on the farm. Jack listened in silence, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't explain. "I'll go with you," he said suddenly, surprising them both with his words. Sarah looked at him in disbelief. "What?" "I'll go with you to the farm. Maybe Maybe I can help somehow. The trip to the farm was uncomfortable at first. Jack felt out of place in Sarah's old Jeep, surrounded by fields and dirt roads. But as they got closer, he couldn't help but marvel at the natural beauty of the place. Upon arrival, they were greeted by Pete and the other workers, who looked at Jack with a mixture of curiosity and mistrust. Sarah immediately got to work, organizing teams and planning strategies to save what they could of the harvest. Jack, feeling useless, offered to help. At first, everyone laughed at seeing the city playboy trying to handle farm tools. But to everyone's surprise, especially his own, Jack threw himself into the work with a determination he didn't know he possessed. For days, they worked tirelessly under the burning sun. Jack discovered muscles he didn't know he had, and at night, he fell exhausted onto the old bed in the main house. But every morning he woke up with new energy, eager to continue. One afternoon, as they rested in the shade of a tree, Sarah looked at Jack in a new light. His skin, once pale, was now tanned by the sun. His hands, once soft, were now calloused from work. But what surprised her most was the genuine smile on his face, something she had never seen before. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked softly. "You don't have to be here helping." Jack was silent for a moment, reflecting. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "But for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that really matters." Those words hung between them, loaded with a meaning that neither dared to fully explore. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink, both felt that something had irrevocably changed between them. What they didn't know was that this trip to the farm would be just the beginning of a much deeper transformation, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The return to New York after the intense experience on the farm marked a turning point in Jack and Sarah's lives. Both came back changed, with a new perspective on their marriage and on themselves. Jack, to everyone's surprise, began to show a genuine interest in the family business. Richard Anderson couldn't believe the change in his son when he showed up at his office one morning, dressed in a suit and tie, asking to be more involved in the company. "Dad, I want to learn," Jack said with a determination that Richard had never seen in him before. "I want to understand how everything works from the ground up." Richard, though skeptical at first, decided to give him a chance. He assigned Jack to different departments, starting from the most basic levels. To everyone's amazement, Jack threw himself into the work with unprecedented enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own challenges. Determined not to abandon her roots, she began looking for ways to improve the management of the farm from a distance. She researched sustainable agriculture and new technologies that could increase productivity without compromising the traditional values of the property. One night, as Sarah worked on her laptop in the living room, Jack arrived home from work, loosening his tie. "What are you doing?" he asked, genuinely interested. Sarah looked up, surprised by the kind tone. "I'm researching efficient irrigation systems. I think we could implement something like that on the farm." Jack sat down beside her, looking at the screen. "You know, at the company we have an agricultural innovation department. Maybe they could help you with that." Sarah looked at him, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in her eyes. "That would be amazing." "Thank you, Jack." For the first time since they met, they shared a genuine smile. The following days saw Jack and Sarah working together on the farm project. What began as a professional collaboration soon became something more. They spent hours discussing ideas, laughing about work anecdotes and sharing their dreams and fears. However, not everything was rosy. Jack's old friends didn't look kindly on his transformation. One night, Tom and the rest of the gang showed up at the apartment, determined to rescue their friend from what they considered a boring life. "Come on, Jack," Tom insisted, shaking a bottle of champagne. "It's Friday night. Don't tell me you've turned into a boring old man." Jack looked at Sarah, who was sitting on the couch with a book. For a moment, he felt tempted to return to his old life of excess, but something had changed in him. "I'm sorry, guys," he finally said. "I have plans tonight." Tom and the others looked at him in disbelief. "Plans? With the farmer girl?" Tom scoffed, casting a disdainful look at Sarah. Jack felt his blood boil. "Her name is Sarah," he said firmly. "And yes, I have plans with my wife. If you can't respect her, you'd better leave." The silence that followed was deafening. One by one, Jack's friends left the apartment, leaving behind looks of disbelief and disappointment. When the door closed, Sarah stood up and approached Jack. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. Jack looked at her, surprised by the intensity of the emotions he felt. "Yes, I did. You're my wife, Sarah, and you deserve respect." That night marked a before and after in their relationship. Although neither of them admitted it out loud, something was blossoming between them, something that went beyond the initial agreement. As their personal life evolved, Their careers were also taking off. Jack was becoming a key player in the Anderson company, bringing fresh ideas and a new perspective. Sarah, for her part, had managed to implement significant changes on the farm, increasing production and improving workers' conditions. One day, Richard Anderson summoned Jack to his office. "Son, I'm impressed," he said, with a glint of pride in his eyes. "You've shown a dedication and talent I didn't know you had." Jack smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you, Dad. I think I finally found my place." Richard nodded, thoughtful. "I think it's time for you to take on more responsibilities. I want you to lead the new expansion project in the Midwest." Jack was left speechless. It was a huge opportunity, a vote of confidence he never thought he'd receive, but it also meant spending a lot of time away from New York, away from Sarah. That night, when he told Sarah about the offer, he expected to see joy on her face. Instead, he saw a shadow of sadness that she quickly tried to hide. "That's wonderful, Jack," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "I'm very proud of you." Jack looked at her intently, feeling his heart race. "Would you come with me?" he asked suddenly. Sarah looked at him in surprise. "What? Come with me to the Midwest?" Jack repeated, taking her hands. "We can do this together. Your experience on the farm would be invaluable for the project." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Was Jack really asking her to go with him, as a real team? I don't know what to say," she mumbled. Jack moved closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "Say yes, please." At that moment, with their hands intertwined and their hearts beating in unison, both realized that what had started as a marriage of convenience had become something much deeper and real. But just when it seemed that everything was falling perfectly into place, fate had a surprise in store that would test their newly discovered love and change the course of their lives forever. The move to the Midwest marked the beginning of a new chapter in Jack and Sarah's life. Together, they embarked on the adventure of leading the Anderson Company's expansion project, facing new challenges and discovering unknown facets of their relationship. They settled in a modest house on the outskirts of Kansas City, far from the luxury Jack was used to, but with the rustic charm that made Sarah feel at home. The first months were of intense adaptation. Jack immersed himself in work, determined to prove his worth, while Sarah applied her farming experience to help local communities improve their cultivation techniques. One afternoon, as they toured a plot of land they were considering for the project, Sarah noticed Jack's worried look. "What's wrong?" she asked, taking his hand. Jack sighed. "It's more complicated than I thought. The land is perfect, but there's a community that has lived here for generations. I don't want to displace them." Sarah smiled, proud to see how her husband's perspective had changed. "Maybe we don't have to. What if we include them in the project?" That conversation gave rise to an innovative idea, a business model that integrated the local community into the expansion project, creating jobs and preserving their lands. Jack presented the proposal to the board of directors, facing resistance from some more conservative members, including his own father. "It's risky, Jack," Richard argued during a video conference. "We don't have experience in this type of community project." "But we have Sarah," Jack responded with conviction. "She knows the field. She knows the people. We can make it work." Jack's passion and determination finally convinced the board. The Roots of the Future project was born, combining business expansion with sustainable community development. As the project progressed, Jack and Sarah grew closer and closer. They spent their nights on the porch of their house, discussing ideas, sharing dreams, and little by little truly falling in love with each other. However, not everything was perfect. The distance and stress began to take their toll on their relationship with their family. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah's mother, although in better health, constantly complained about her daughter's absence. On the other hand, Jack's old friends in New York spread rumors about how the farmer girl had changed him, taking him away from his true essence. One night, after a particularly difficult call with her mother, Sarah broke down in Jack's arms. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing," she sobbed. "My mother needs me. The farm needs me." Jack hugged her tightly. "You're doing something incredible here, Sarah. You're changing lives, including mine." They looked into each other's eyes, and at that moment, all the love they had been silently cultivating blossomed. Without words, their lips met in a passionate kiss, sealing a love they could no longer deny. But fate had one more test in store for their newly confessed love. One morning, as they were having breakfast, they received an urgent call from New York. Jack's father had suffered a heart attack. Without thinking twice, they packed their bags and flew back to the city. At the hospital, they found Richard Anderson connected to machines, weak but stable. The look of relief in his eyes when he saw Jack was unmistakable. "My son," Richard whispered. I feared I wouldn't see you again. Jack took his father's hand, tears in his eyes. I'm here, Dad, and I'm not going anywhere. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Jack divided his time between the hospital and the office, trying to keep the company afloat in his father's absence. Sarah, for her part, took charge of coordinating Richard's care and managing household affairs. One night, as Sarah was preparing tea in the kitchen of the Anderson mansion, she overheard a conversation that wasn't meant for her ears. Jack, son, it was Richard's voice. I think it's time for you to take the reins of the company, but I need to know that you're committed to this, that you won't go back to your old habits. There was a moment of silence before Jack responded. Dad, I've changed, and a big part of that change is thanks to Sarah. She's taught me the value of hard work, of empathy. I know, Richard interrupted, and that's why I have to ask you something difficult. If you want to inherit the company, I need you to divorce Sarah. Sarah felt the world stop. Divorce? After everything they had been through together. What? Jack's voice sounded as surprised as she felt. Why are you asking me that, son? The board of directors doesn't look kindly on your marriage to a farmer. They believe she doesn't have the sophistication necessary to be the wife of the CEO of Anderson Enterprises. If you want to take this company to the next level, you need someone from our social circle. Sarah couldn't listen anymore. With a broken heart, she silently left the mansion, tears running down her cheeks. How had they come to this point? Would all the love they had built be reduced to nothing in the face of social and business expectations? As she walked aimlessly through the streets of New York, Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her life. Should she fight for her love, or step aside for the sake of Jack's career? What Sarah didn't know was that at that very moment, Jack was making a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. A decision that would test not only their love, but also their values and everything they had built together. Sarah wandered the streets of New York, her mind a whirlwind of emotions and contradictory thoughts. The city that once seemed cold and alienating to her now reflected the chaos in her heart. Meanwhile, in the Anderson mansion, Jack faced the decisive moment of his life. No, Jack said with a firm voice that surprised both his father and himself. I'm not going to divorce Sarah. Richard Anderson looked at his son with a mixture of amazement and disappointment. Jack, think about what you're saying. This is your chance to take the reins of the company, to become the man I always knew you could be. Dad, don't you understand? Jack replied, his voice trembling with emotion. I already am that man thanks to Sarah. She has taught me more about life, hard work and true love than I ever learned in all my years of partying and excess. He stood up, pacing the room with renewed energy. If the board can't see the value that Sarah brings to my life and this company, then maybe it's not the company I want to lead. Richard was left speechless, seeing his son with new eyes. For the first time, he saw in Jack not the irresponsible young man he had been, but the man he had become. Meanwhile, Sarah had reached a nearby park, sitting on a bench with her gaze lost on the horizon. It was there that Mrs. Thompson found her, having arrived in New York for a medical checkup. My girl, what are you doing here alone? The mother asked, sitting next to her daughter. Sarah broke down in tears, telling her mother everything she had overheard. Mrs. Thompson listened in silence, gently stroking her daughter's hair. Sarah, look at me, Mrs. Thompson finally said, taking her daughter's face in her hands. All my life I've worked hard. I fought against illness, and you know why? For you, to give you a better future. But now I see that future isn't just about money or social position. It's about love, about being true to yourself. Sarah looked at her mother, surprised by the depth of her words. If you love Jack, if you believe in what you've built together, then fight for it, Mrs. Thompson continued. Don't let anyone, not even his family, tell you that you're not worthy. Inspired by her mother's words, Sarah stood up with determination. It was time to face the situation head-on. Meanwhile, in the Anderson mansion, the discussion between Jack and his father had reached a critical point. If I have to choose between the company and Sarah, I choose Sarah, Jack declared. She has shown me that there's more to life than money and power. She has taught me the value of authenticity and honest work. At that moment, the door burst open. Sarah entered, her eyes bright with determination. You don't have to choose, Jack, she said, surprising everyone present. We're in this together. She turned to Richard, who looked at her open-mouthed. Mr. Anderson, I know I'm not what you expected for your son. I don't come from a wealthy family. I don't have an important last name, but I love your son, and together we've built something beautiful and meaningful. Jack approached her, taking her hand. Sarah, you heard? Yes, I heard everything, she interrupted, and I'm here to fight for us, for what we've built together. Richard Anderson looked at them, seeing for the first time the strength and love they radiated as a couple. At that moment, something changed in his expression. I was wrong, he finally admitted, to everyone's surprise. Jack, Sarah, I owe you an apology. I've been so concerned with appearances and the board's expectations that I didn't see what was right in front of my eyes. He stood up with difficulty from the bed, approaching the couple. You two have achieved more in these months than I have in years. You've shown that success isn't just measured in numbers, but in the impact we have on others' lives. Jack and Sarah looked at each other, surprised by the turn of events. The Roots of the Future project is exactly what this company needs, Richard continued. A new direction, an approach that combines business success with social responsibility. And you two are the right ones to lead it. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a sense of hope and possibilities. Jack hugged Sarah, feeling that finally all the pieces of his life fit perfectly together. However, as they celebrated this moment of triumph, none of them knew that fate had one last surprise in store, one that would test not only their love and determination, but also everything they thought they knew about themselves and their future together. Somewhere in New York, a sealed envelope waited to be opened, containing information that would change their lives forever. The true test of their love was about to begin. The sun rose over New York, bathing the city in a golden light that seemed to herald a new beginning. In the Anderson mansion, Jack and Sarah woke up with a sense of peace they hadn't experienced in a long time. Richard's acceptance and the promise of a future together at the helm of the company seemed to have dispelled all the clouds that overshadowed their relationship. However, fate had other plans. That morning, as they were having breakfast on the terrace, the butler approached with an envelope on a silver tray. "Mrs. Anderson, this arrived for you," he said, handing her the envelope. Sarah took it with curiosity. She wasn't expecting correspondence in New York. As she opened it, her face turned pale. "What's wrong, love?" Jack asked, concerned. With trembling hands, Sarah passed him the document. It was a notification from a law firm, informing her that a distant uncle whom she barely knew had passed away, leaving her a substantial inheritance. This can't be true," Sarah murmured, incredulous. Jack read the document, his eyes widening more and more. The inheritance not only included a considerable sum of money, but also shares in several important companies and properties in different parts of the country. "Sarah, this is incredible," Jack said, unable to hide his amazement. You're rich." The news spread quickly. Within days, the media was obsessed with the story of the American Cinderella, the humble farmer turned millionaire overnight. Sarah's life took a 180-degree turn. Suddenly, she found herself surrounded by financial advisors, lawyers, and journalists. The same people who had previously looked down on her for her humble origins now sought her friendship and favor. Jack observed all this with a mixture of pride and concern. On one hand, he was happy to see Sarah receiving the recognition she deserved. On the other, he feared that this sudden wealth might change her, distancing her from the values that had united them. One night, as Sarah was reviewing documents in her new study, Jack entered with 2 cups of coffee. "How do you feel about all this?" he asked, sitting across from her. Sarah sighed, setting the papers aside. "Honestly, I'm overwhelmed. Everything has changed so fast. Do you regret it?" Jack asked, with a hint of fear in his voice. Sarah looked at him, surprised. "Regret it? What?" "Us," Jack replied, lowering his gaze. "Now that you have all this, maybe you don't need me anymore." Sarah got up from her chair and knelt in front of Jack, taking his hands. "Jack, look at me. You are the best thing that's ever happened to me. This money, these properties, they mean nothing compared to what we've built together." They looked into each other's eyes, and at that moment, both knew that their love was stronger than any change of fortune. However, the challenges were not over. Sarah's new position in society attracted the attention of people with less than honorable intentions. Among them Tom, Jack's old friend, who saw in Sarah an opportunity to regain his influence. One afternoon, as Sarah was leaving a business meeting, Tom approached her. "Sarah, darling, how about we go for a drink? We could discuss some investment opportunities," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sarah, remembering how Tom had treated her in the past, was about to reject him. But then she thought of Jack, of how he had changed, and decided to give Tom a chance. "All right, Tom, but just a quick coffee." What Sarah didn't know was that Tom had carefully planned everything. He took them to a crowded cafe, where they accidentally ran into a group of paparazzi. Before Sarah could react, Tom hugged her, posing for the cameras as if they were a couple. The photos went viral within hours. Jack saw them on his phone while he was at the office, feeling his world crumble. When Sarah arrived home that night, she found Jack waiting for her in the living room, with an expression she had never seen on his face before. "How could you?" Jack asked, his voice broken with pain. "After everything we've been through, Jack, it's not what it looks like," Sarah tried to explain, desperate. "Tom set me up, But Jack didn't want to listen. Years of insecurities and the fear of not being enough for Sarah resurfaced strongly. "Maybe my father was right," Jack said, heading for the door. Maybe we should never have gotten married. Sarah watched him leave, feeling her heart break into 1,000 pieces. How had they come to this point? How could they have allowed external circumstances to threaten what they had built with so much effort? As the door closed behind Jack, Sarah realized they were at a crossroads. What happened next would define not only their future as a couple, but also who they were as individuals. The true test of their love was about to begin, and the outcome would depend on their ability to remember what really mattered, beyond money, social status, or appearances. In that moment of desperation, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. Sarah remained motionless for a few moments, staring at the door through which Jack had left. Suddenly, a fierce determination took over her. She wasn't going to let a misunderstanding and the manipulations of others destroy what they had worked so hard to build. Without thinking twice, she ran out after Jack. She found him in the garden of the mansion, about to get into his car. "Jack, wait!" Sarah shouted, her voice filled with emotion. "Please, listen to me." Jack stopped, but didn't turn to look at her. Sarah approached slowly, her heart pounding. "Jack, look at me," she pleaded softly. "What you saw, it's not what it seems. Tom set me up. I would never, ever betray you." Finally, Jack turned to face her. His eyes were full of pain and confusion. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Everything has changed so much. You've changed." Sarah felt her heart breaking at hearing those words. She took Jack's hands in hers and looked him directly in the eyes. "Jack, it's true that circumstances have changed, but my feelings for you remain the same. In fact, they're stronger than ever. Do you remember when we met? I was a simple farmer, and you were a millionaire playboy. We married for convenience, but we found something much more valuable: true love." Sarah's words seemed to awaken something in Jack. His expression softened slightly. "But now you're the millionaire," Jack said with a hint of bitterness in his voice. "You don't need me anymore." Sarah shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "You're wrong. I need you more than ever. This money, this new life, it means nothing without you. You taught me that there are things more important than money or social status. You taught me to believe in myself, to fight for my dreams." Jack looked at her, surprised by the intensity of her words. "Do you really mean that?" he asked, a glimmer of hope in his voice. "With all my heart," Sarah replied. "Jack, you changed my life. You showed me a world I didn't even know existed, and in the process you became the man I always knew you could be. I'm not going to let a misunderstanding or the manipulations of others destroy what we have." At that moment, something changed in Jack's expression. The doubt and pain were replaced by deep understanding and renewed love. "Sarah, I'm sorry," he said, pulling her close. "I should have trusted you. It's just that I was afraid of losing you." They hugged tightly, feeling all the misunderstandings and doubts dissipate. "You're not going to lose me, Jack," Sarah whispered. "We're in this together, remember?" They looked into each other's eyes and, without needing words, sealed their love with a passionate kiss. But their story didn't end there. In the following days, Sarah and Jack worked together to unmask Tom's manipulations and clear their public image. They used their influence and resources not for revenge, but to promote noble causes and help those in need. The Roots of the Future project became a model of sustainable and socially responsible business, inspiring other companies to follow their example. Sarah's farm was transformed into an agricultural research and development center, improving the lives of hundreds of families in the region. A year after the crisis that nearly separated them, Jack and Sarah renewed their wedding vows in an intimate ceremony on the farm. This time it wasn't a marriage of convenience, but a celebration of the true love they had built. As they exchanged rings, Jack looked at Sarah with adoration. "Sarah, when we met, I thought I had everything I could want in life, but you showed me I was wrong. You taught me the value of hard work, humility, and unconditional love. I love you not for what you have, but for who you are." Sarah, with tears of happiness in her eyes, responded, "Jack, you gave me a world I never dreamed existed. But more importantly, you gave me your heart. No matter how much our life changes, my love for you will always be constant. You're my partner, my best friend, my true love." As the sun set over the farm, bathing everything in a golden glow, Jack and Sarah sealed their love with a kiss. The guests applauded, moved by the love story they had witnessed. Among the crowd, Richard Anderson watched his son and daughter-in-law with pride. He approached them with a smile. "You two have taught me more about love and true success than I learned in my entire life," he said, hugging them. "I'm proud to call you family." That night, as Jack and Sarah danced under the stars, surrounded by their loved ones, they knew they had found something more valuable than any fortune, a love that could overcome any obstacle. Their story, which began as an arrangement of convenience, had become a testimony to the transformative power of true love. They proved that when two people love and support each other, there is no challenge they can't overcome, no dream they can't achieve. And so, as the music played softly and the farm lights twinkled in the distance, Jack and Sarah looked to the future with hope and excitement, knowing that whatever happened, they would face it together, with love as their guiding force.